With the help of Hashem, we are learning Moed Katan Daf Zayin. We left off on Daf Zayin all the way on top of the Amid. We are learning about trapping rodents from orchards, from grain fields, and Bechlal, the concept that there are times that even when we are allowed to do a malacha, when we are allowed to do certain activities, but doing them in a way that they will be classified as a Maise Uman or in a professional manner, will be something that we may not do those activities, as we will see it relates to the machlokes tanoim we had in the Mishnah regarding trapping rodents from certain areas. We're going to have on Daf Zayin a Mishnah that's going to address whether a kohen may inspect a person for tzora'as and cholamoyed. We will be spending a nice amount of time on Daf Zayin speaking a little bit about tumas tzora'as, about a mitzoida that's called a confined mitzoida, about a confirmed mitzoida, right? A musgar, a muchlat, the sum of the differences between them. There is a general idea, since Hashem commanded us on Yom Tov, on Cholamoyed, v'samachta b'chagecha. So getting involved in something that might diminish our level of simcha is something that we may not do on Yom Tov nor on Cholamoyed. And really, the question regarding a person who thinks that he or she might have the signs of this tzoras leprosy, whether on their body, if they're going to go to a kohen, there's a big question whether the kohen has the right not to render a ruling. If the kohen has such a right, and he can abstain from rendering a ruling, and he would only render a ruling that would either leave the person the way they are, not make them worse, or actually make the person even better, then there wouldn't be a problem going to a kohen on Yom Tov, on Cholamoyed. We're going to focus on Cholamoyed now. But if a kohen who sees the signs of tzoras must immediately render a ruling, as we will learn the details, then there is room to say that don't even go to the kohen on Cholamoyed, because you might hear a ruling that will render you more tamei, and that's going to diminish or take away your simchas Yom Tov. We're going to learn the concept that even though the Torah very often works through the ways of a hekesh, that we compare one case to the other. We learn rules here from Hashem's rules that are explicit over there. But if the source is what we call a chiddush, which means that the source is an area in where the regular klalim are not in effect, so we say michidusha loy gomrinam. We can't use a chiddush law to be a source to teach from it to other laws. Chavra, without any further ado, let us start on Daf Zayin, Amid Aleph, all the way on top of the Amid, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. So the topic in the Mishnah on Daf Vav Amid Beis was regarding trapping the Ishus rodent, the Achbar rodent. Tanach holds that you can trap them in the regular manner, whether you're trapping them from an orchard, and as we explained when we learned the Mishnah, that these rodents create greater damage when it comes to orchards, to trees, because they also eat up the roots of the trees. They create damage in a grain field, but on a lesser level. The first opinion in the Mishnah does not differentiate. The Mishnah holds that you are allowed to trap rodents both from an orchard and from a grain field. However, right, the Chachamim hold, as we learned in the Mishnah, and as we see in the Gemara in today's and top of the Amid, that the version the Gemara had in the Mishnah was not V'Chachamim Amrim, but it was actually the Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yehuda holds. It depends. That mistake ha'ilan, if you're laying the traps in an orchard, there again, since the damage is worse, so the Chachamim allowed us to do it even kedarka, in the usual manner. However, umisadei halavan, if you are laying out these traps in a grain field, you are allowed to do it. But there you got to make a shinoi. You got to do it. You have to lay them shaloi kedarka. So we're going to have again very interesting hafachba v'hafachba. Let's find out what's the usual manner, what's the unusual manner. And today in LA, you call up the Terminex or who knows what other company. What do they do? So Tanan Rabbanan, 3 lines from the top. What's the way kedarka? What's the usual way of trapping these rodents? Chayfer guma, you dig out a hole, and v'toila b'mitzuda, and you suspend a trap in the hole. You furrow a hole because you want to have an exit from where these rodents, that many of them live a lot underground, they should be able to exit easy. And once they're coming out, that is where you suspend the trap. What is shaloi kedarkoi? So says the Gemara, says the Braisa, that noyetz shaput, that you would bang a spit or some sort of other metal pole into the ground, more or less above where you intuit is their underground home. So you're putting this metal spit in there, umake b'kordam, and you're going to knock, you're going to bang on top of the spit with a hammer. And what does that affect? It flattens the ground beneath it. The pshat, according to some, is that actually causes for their underground home to implode, and the rodents are caught and they are crushed where they are. That's the unusual manner, which at least that, according to Rabbi Yehuda, could be done in a stay loving. Says the Gemara Tanya, we learned to Rabbi Reis. Either this is in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, or we have in the Sheiltos, whose version is that the following was said by Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That was only said regarding a grain field that is not near an orchard. So there is where, again, the only problem is grain. It's taka problem. You are allowed to trap it. You got to trap it in an unusual manner. But if you have a grain field that's near an orchard, you can lay out traps in the usual manner. Why? Because because that's the nature of rodents. They don't know borders. Just because they are currently in a grain field, or their home that they made for themselves is under the ground of a grain field, nothing is stopping them of going over to the neighbor, you understand, and making a lachaim and a parbaisen over there. They're going to start eating up the roots. Now, the Gemara, again, doesn't give you exactly the distance, but it's not about where they are currently, but if it's normal for them to go and overreach into a nearby orchard, even Rabbi Yehuda will be moida that you can trap them kedarkoi. Okay, now the second thing we learned in the Mishnah Navav was regarding repairing a fence around the field. Right now, when we speak about that, you are allowed to repair. That implies that you may not build. So let's read it inside. Right, if there was a breach in a fence around the field, you are allowed to fix it on Chol HaMoed. So now, says the Gemara as a given, that you are allowed to repair it, but not in a professional manner. You got to do it in a more of a temporary way, in a less professional manner. It serves the purpose of affording protection, but it's not it's not good to go. You're going to have to finalize that, upgrade it after Yom Tov. Keitzad Mekadim. How do you repair it? Rabbi Yosef says Buhutza v'dafna. Now, guys, you're going to put different types of leaves and different parts of branches from trees. You're going to insert it inside the fence. These things are not permanent, but they do the job, at least temporarily. The Masnis Satana and the Braisa, we learned the Braisa is not arguing. It's giving another option. Most of these fences were made out of stone. So you can even, you can pile the breach with stones, but but you can't plaster them, or you can't cement them. In other words, whatever it is that you're doing, you're fixing the breach, not professionally. You're not fixing it permanently, but again, because of davar ha'aved, in other words, you can't have a breach in the field. Someone or something will come and make a destruction, and that's called davar ha'aved, and you might lose principle. So to prevent the loss of principle, you are allowed to do malacha. In our case, again, with the shinoi or in an unprofessional manner. Right? You can only repair, but you may not build anew. Only if the wall, the fence is around a garden. In other words, the worst case scenario is not a great loss. These are concepts. What number is great? Not for now, the concept. So there you can repair. But if there is a wall or a fence, right, around your courtyard, and people very commonly, they lived in their homes and courtyard. So things of greater value were left in the courtyard. If someone were to walk into your courtyard, you would incur a greater loss. A greater loss. Here you are allowed to build, not only to repair, but you can build. Wow. Says the Gemara, we can substantiate this statement of an Amayra of Rab Chizda from the following Brisa. The Brisa writes that if there is a wall that's leaning into the public domain, so there's a danger that it might hurt someone, says the Brisa, you can demolish the wall. And mind you, once you demolish the wall, you took away the danger. But here the Brisa adds, Ubayne kedarkai. Ubayne kedarkai means you can now rebuild it. Now, the Brisa adds the words, B'pnei hasakana. There's a danger element. But make no mistake, the danger element is only when the wall is leaning. So thus, allowing us to demolish it resolves the sakana. Rebuilding it, why can you rebuild it? You can rebuild it only because, like we mentioned, even though our Mishnah implies that you can only repair and not build, that's because our Mishnah is speaking about a garden. But if this is a wall separating the public domain and someone's private yard, if someone were to go into the yard, there would be a greater loss. There you can build it. So the Gemara says there's no proof. There's no proof because maybe Hassan kedektani taima the pnei asakana. Maybe the only reason why it's allowed to rebuild is because there's a danger element. But hold on, Nachamo. The danger element is only when the wall is leaning. Once you break it, right? Once you broke it, there's no danger. The Brisa says you can rebuild it. The Gemara is arguing that's also connected to danger. And if you remember, we learned, and we'll continue to learn a concept. It's called that soifan atu tchilasan or tchilasan atu soifan. It's the Talmudic way of writing the words that we find in Sefer Yetzirah, no'ot tchilasan v'soifan v'soifan v'tchilasan, which means that if the person will know that they may not rebuild the wall, they lechatchila won't demolish it. And if they won't demolish it, then there's going to be a danger. So again, maybe the whole reason why they allowed you to rebuild it is to prevent danger. When there is no danger involved at all, maybe you can't go from there. Maybe you may never rebuild it. There's another version of how they brought the Brisa in conjunction with Rab Chizda, Ikeda Amri, that they actually used this Brisa to challenge Rab Chizda. Tashema, it says in the Brisa, that if there is a wall that's leaning over the public domain, leaning over in a way where there's a danger that it might fall on the public domain, and that, God forbid, can hurt and or kill. So there says the Brisa, you are allowed to demolish the wall on Cholamoyed and rebuild it properly, the Pnei Asakana, because all of this is connected to danger. So here, Fakir, this is a kasha. In other words, what do we see? That the only time they allow you to build is when there's a danger element. Pnei Asakana in, Shalom Pnei Asakana, loy. That's a problem. That's a kasha. So therefore, Leimot the heavy to Yufta the Rab Chizda, who allows you to build a wall around a yard, even if there's no danger element. So answers the Gemara, Rab Chizda under the opposite. Hassan, because of the danger element, there is something unique, which is you can demolish and build. But around the yard, if there's no danger, there's already a wall that's not okay. You may not demolish and rebuild, but you can rebuild. Asks the Gemara, hold on. Now we even when there was a danger element, so again, only demolish. Hasam nami listed v'loy livni. So answers the Gemara that if you would not allow a person to rebuild it, imkain nimna v'loy soisid, they will not demolish it, and the allowance of rebuilding is part of the solution which addresses the danger element. Now that we did not refute Rab Chizda, says Rav Ashi, I actually will prove Rab Chizda's statement from our Mishnah. Daikanami, Masnisanami Daikim, because it says in our Mishnah, Ubashvi is Boine Kedarkoim. The Mishnah is also speaking about the Shemitah year, that you are allowed to build a fence around somewhere. The Mishnah didn't say what during the Shemitah year. Now, what is the case of the Mishnah the Heicham? If the Mishnah is speaking about a yard is an area in which no one ever plants anything. By Shemitah, all of the restrictions that we have on Shemitah are only related to the produce of the land. You can't work the land, you can't, right? Like we learned a few days ago. Why would you even think that you can't build a wall which is not connected to plantations, which will be your yard? It can't be that the Mishnah is speaking about a chatzah because tzricha lo meimar. Of course, you can build a wall around your chatzah on Shemitah. Why not? Therefore, it must be elalav degina. There's a chiddush because af al gav the mechse commander of nitiros elapeda, even though it looks like you are building a wall to protect your produce, and as we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah, part of the laws of Shemitah is you must allow for everyone to have access to the fruits, to the produce, to the grains that is growing on your land. It belongs to everyone. And building a wall appears like you are not allowing anyone to enter, which is taka why there's a novelty for the Mishnah to teach you that you are allowed to build a wall. Why are you allowed to build a wall? Because when you build a wall, you can leave the gate open. You know, there's two different things. You're building a wall, but it doesn't, you can always, like we know, you have a wall, you have a fence around your house. If you leave it open, there's no problem. But bottom line is that since in the case of Shemitah, which the Mishnah juxtaposes with the case of Chol Hamoed, it must be referring to a gina, to a garden. So Shema Mina, that when the Mishnah says you can repair, from which we infer repair, yes, but build a new no, is only regarding a garden, like Rab Chizda says. And this is a beautiful concept. So there's working not in a professional manner to prevent a lesser amount of loss. A greater loss, which is what were to happen if you don't have a protection around your personal property, you can even build l'chatchila. You can build l'chatchila. So it's not davar ha'aved. Is there a loss? Is there not a loss? So what we learned right now is a gavaldik idea, is that there are madregas, there are levels in a davar ha'aved. Lesser amount, a greater amount. And the way this is worded in other areas in halacha, remember, hefsid meruba. Hefsid meruba allows for a greater amount of hetedim. And the words that were used by Chol Hamoed, for whatever reason, it's not hefsid meruba or hefsid, it's davar ha'aved. But still, this concept, we already begin to see that there are different levels of loss, however you measure it, and the more the loss, the greater the heter you will receive. Okay. Now, Chavra, the next sugya that is going to go throughout today's daf, and it's going to go into daf ches, speaks about the laws of leprosy. And just as an intro, which will help us understand, we spoke out a while back because we were learning a sugya regarding leprosy, or at least I think we were learning a sugya of leprosy at the time that we were learning Parshas Tazria, and the Alter Rebbe has a phenomenal insight regarding there are two portions in the Torah, or there's a portion and a part of Mitzvah that speaks about something, a phenomena that we don't find nowadays. And just for the sake of clarity, and as we'll see throughout the sugya, for those who erroneously think that soras is some sort of physical ailment, and we do find the concept of you need to quarantine explicitly in the Torah. The Mitzvah, male or female, once they are declared a Mitzvah at a certain point, they have to go michutz lamachana, they have to move out of the walled city, people keep away from them. If all of that is to prevent, let's say, the spread of an illness, then all of the details that we're learning now will not fit. And then the crux of the matter is that a person is only deemed a Mitzvah only after the Kohen declares that person to be a Mitzvah. And not only that, we'll see a issue of it's possible that a Kohen can look at someone, examine someone's signs of tzodas, and not to dampen the joy of Yom Tov, we'll see some opinions hold. He can say, I'm not giving you a ruling. Come back next week. And obviously, if there would be a danger element or a health element, what do you mean come back next week? A person, God forbid, is diagnosed today with an illness. For the doctor to tell a person, come back next week, I don't want to ruin your Chol Hamoed, you're not allowed to do that. If a person has an illness, they have to know what it is, and they have to start treating it, or if they're contagious, at least to prevent other people. This is a ruchniistic thing, as we know, that when we were on a higher level, or the words of the Alter Rebbe, that Torah is to be learned in every single world. But the written Torah primarily is the Torah of the world of Atzilus, which is why what halachis in the Torah are the most spelled out explicitly, the laws of korbanos, including the laws of tzoras. And the laws of tzoras is dafka given to people that are on a very high level, and their imperfection is only very superficial. That's the way we view a tzoras. And and that's why the manifestation of their imperfection is external. The lower the generation, the deeper the issues a person has beruchnius, that if and when that manifests physically, it's going to manifest in some sort of internal organ issue. Just as an approach, and of course, it doesn't contradict at all, that it's about saying Lashon Hara. We know all that. But it's a good way to look at it. When we say that Mashiach is a leper, it all and any ailment, begashmius, that is of external of the skin, actually is not such a bad thing. Even though until today, all of the skin ailments, we don't know properly how to cure them yet. But it actually implies that the ikid, the inner, is okay, and there's some final external thing that has to be rectified, and that is what's happening in the world of Atzilus, that any imperfection is if there is an imperfection, is very superficial, and these are the laws of Tzoras. Now, we're going to make another intro to a couple of more details on Amud Beis, but let's begin learning the Mishnah. Says Rabbi Meir, we're going to take out the word Batchila, which is very important, but we'll see why we'll take it out. It's in the parentheses. That if a person, now another quick, there's Negoyim on the body, there's Negoyim on the garment, there's Negoyim on the house. Negoyim, it's very nuanced. There are many details. Let's speak about blemishes of the body. That there are various signs that could appear on one's skin. For example, there are parts of the body, let's say the skin of one person's arm, in where you have skin and there's small hairs growing out of that area. So you have, if a minimum size of area, kigris, 36 hairs by 36 hairs, become very white, with all of the details of how white is that white, number one, that's the first sign. And then there is a secondary sign, which could be, just giving one example, that the hairs that are growing out of that area then turn white. That is where, if one were to go to a kohen, and you have to go to a kohen, knowing the rules don't make you a mitzoida or not. It's the declaration of the mitzoida that will render you into a mitzoida. He will declare you are a mitzoida. Just be aware of that. Now, another layer. There are times that the body developed some of the signs, but not all of the signs. And we'll leave it at that. This is a very general statement. A lot of details are missing, but it's not legeya to our sugya. When a person only developed some of the signs of this toida leprosy, then the kohen will declare them to be a matzoida musgar. Musgar means that they are not yet confirmed, but they are confined. We'll explain on Amud Beis confined to what, but they are on a level of a tzoras. They are confined mitzoidas. What happens now? So the Torah says they wait a week. At the end of the week, from when they were declared to be this confined mitzoida, they go back to the kohen. And if everything stayed the way it was, then they remain confined for another week. If the signs go away, they are going to be declared pure. If things get worse, we'll see that at a time the kohen will declare them to be confirmed. And a confirmed mitzoida, a mitzoida muchlak, as we will see, has additional laws which make his status and his way out more complicated. When a mitzoida is confirmed, he's not doomed to be confirmed for the rest of his life. Whenever the signs of tzoras begins to go away, again, a kohen will come and visit him. And once the kohen determines that the signs are indeed no longer there, the halachic signs, then he'll begin a process of purification. He won't become pure right away, but it's an interesting process. It's a 7-day process. And on the 8th day, after doing something on the first day and on the 7th day and the korbanos of the 8th day, this person becomes tahor. Now, our Mishnah does not clarify which step are we up to when we are questioning whether you can show the signs to a kohen. And there are many stages in the way. There is when the person is like us. We're not mitzodoim. We're not even confined. We were okay. And now maybe these signs are signs of tzoras. That is one place, one moment, the first time you would go to a kohen. Then there is another time, a person who was already confined, but not yet confirmed. And even that, there are 2 times. There is, at the end of the first week, there is an option of continuing the confined period for a second week. And the Torah writes that if after the second week, even if things stayed the same, even if things did not get better, if it didn't get worse, at the end of the second week, they'll be deemed pure. Then there was the person who was already confirmed, but now the things got better. And there also, he would have to be seen by a kohen to determine whether halachically he can begin his purification process or not. So really, there are many points where regarding tzoras, one needs to interact with the kohen, and the Mishnah doesn't specify which point. The Mishnah introduces the concept. The concept is like this, that on Yom Tov, it says, V'samachta b'chagecha. When someone is going to be declared a mitzoyra on any level, it's going to diminish the joy of Yom Tov. Based on the premise, again, that tzoras is not an illness, that when you're a mitzoyra, you have to be quarantined, it's not contagious, it's not dangerous. There's the right of not a kohen not examining it. Now, another detail, as we will see, there are those who hold, let a kohen examine it. If the ruling that the kohen would like to give will downgrade the status, then he'll be quiet if there was such an option, if there is an option. And if the ruling is a good ruling, in other words, if what the signs are not halachically problematic, great. So then there's no downside going to the kohen. Rav Meir holds exactly that. Rav Meir holds that even after a kohen sees the signs of tzoras, the kohen is not obligated to give a ruling. He has the option to be quiet. So there's no downside showing tzoras to a kohen on Chol HaMoed. It will never dampen your simcha. Adarabah, you only have what to gain. Says the Mishnah, show your nega on Chol HaMoed to a kohen. If the ruling will bring about a leniency, then the kohen will indeed render the ruling. But if the kohen determines that what he sees is going to worsen your status of tumah, the kohen simply won't say it. The kohen will tell you, come back after Yom Tov. And therefore, the advantage here is you will never dampen your Yom Tov by showing your tzoras to a kohen. The Chachamim, and as we will see, the Chachamim is Rebbe Yossi. Loy lahaka means that since if a kohen were to see it, he will have to render a ruling. Could be the ruling will be good for you. Could be the ruling will be bad for you. So therefore, the other solution that the Chachamim give, or Rabbi Yossi gives us, who says you go to a kohen, lechatchila, don't go to a kohen. The concepts are amazing, and now we're going to break down into greater detail. It's going to be very beautiful because, like I mentioned, there was someone who's completely taught the first time they're going to a kohen. Then there was a person who was only confined, not yet confirmed. Then there was another time where you're going to go from confined to confirmed or from confined to pure. Then you have the kohen that's already confirmed, the person who's confirmed, and now they're going to have to get out of that. So there's going to a kohen, hopefully to get the ruling that the signs went away and you can begin your purification process.
Right. Do we do this with any other way of rendering halacha, delaying it because the results are not good results?
If there is no danger involved, what's Kevin is asking a good question. Is there any other place in halacha where you have a shaila and you go to the Rav and the Rav has an option not to give a ruling? Absolutely. I'll give you just one example. I shouldn't laugh. I'm saying that if, God forbid, let's say there's a couple and there is some issue whether halachically they are, infidelity, God forbid. A Rav can say he needs to think about it more. I mean, I don't think that's a good example. I think over there, if a Rav knows that they can't be together, he has to render that ruling. Let me think about another case.
Thank you.
Very interesting. And another thing, Kevin, let me tell you what's very unique, that normally halachic rulings have to be rendered by the halachic experts. And by tzoras, it has nothing to do with the expert. It's not about the expert. Now, if a kohen is not an expert, he has to bring with him an expert. And the expert will tell the kohen what to say, which is amazing. That's for sure unique. The Rebbe says that since at times the mitzoyra has to be quarantined, has to be pushed aside, to push another Jewish side is the end of the world. And therefore only a kohen who by nature is a kind person, a kohen is an isha chesed, Aron HaKohen, only an isha chesed has the right to be the one to determine, God forbid, if and when someone has to be pushed aside. If a person is not a kind person, they're automatically disqualified to give a ruling which might quarantine another Yid. Let's go inside. Tanya, we learned in a Braisa. Rabbi Meir Oimer. Rabbi Meir says, like we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi, that's the Chachamim says, why? Because if you will involve yourself, says Rabbi Yossi, even though your intent is to involve yourself, hopefully to find a heter. But he holds that then then you will have to render a decision. In other words, once the client sees it, can't say come back later. And could be what he'll see will make the person more tamei, and it's going to take away the yom. Now, here's the key where we're going to have to unpackage all the details. Comes along Rabbeinu HaKadosh, right? And he says like this, that Nidin Divrei Rav Meir, I agree with Rav Meir in the case where the person was a musgar, he was already confined. He's going to the client to see whether he's going to become even worse. And we'll see in a moment. I agree with Rav Meir. He is allowed to go to the client on Chol HaMoed. However, I, Rebbe, agree with Rav Yossi. If he is already a muchlat, he's already confirmed that he may not go to a kohen on Chol HaMoed. Now, why? Why would that be? So let me just say one nekuda. Rebbe agrees with Rabbi Yossi. Rebbe agrees to the concept that if a person shows his signs of leprosy to the kohen does not have an option to tell him, come back later. He has to render a ruling. But the beauty of Rebbe is that he is already breaking down many, many cases, contrasting one with the other, as we'll do in a moment. And he's going to point out that there are certain phases in this journey in which there isn't a downside. Isn't the downside doesn't mean that this person will become tar. Isn't the downside means that if a person who has these signs goes to a kohen, if the worst case scenario is they remain as tamei as they are, as long as the kohen will not make them worse, that's not called a downside. You didn't dampen their chag. You're not ruining the v'samach. It was already ruined. They got used to it, right? Gavaldik. So whenever it can never get worse, it can only get better. That is where Rabbi Yossi, that Rebbe will hold, go to the kohen. When, in other words, like Rav Meir, but whenever if there is an option where in a certain scenario things will get worse, then like Rabbi Yossi, you don't go to the kohen. So now the Gemara clarifies. Let's go through all the cases. Amar Ravam bitar. If a person prior to Yom Tiv, Bechlal was not a mitzvah, and these signs are appearing for the first time, and now we're going to the kohen for the first time. Says Rava Gavaldik Yechidish that even Rav Meir holds don't go to the kohen. Now, why should you not go to the kohen? Why should you not go to the kohen? Because even though Rav Meir holds that the kohen is not obligated to give you a halachic ruling, but if the only halachic ruling that is possible here will make it worse, why would you go? Makes a lot of sense. A person sees the signs of tzoras. Why go on Chol HaMoed? I mean, the best case scenario is you stay the same. Stay the same. The best case scenario, you prior to the first ruling, you're not a mitzvah. You'll remain not a mitzvah. But maybe these signs are problematic. Maybe they are super problematic. You'll become right away confirmed. Maybe they are partially problematic. You'll become a confined. It's problematic. There is no upside. It's either the same or worse. Why go? Gaval. Now, next. The Hezger Rishonim, Rashi says, if you were already deemed a partial mitzvah, well, some of the signs appeared. They did not confirm you. We'll see details. It's even worse. But you were confined. You were confined to the mitzvah. And as we mentioned, a confined mitzvah waits a week. And then they go at the end of the first week to a kohen. And there is the possibility, if things stayed the same, if things did not get worse, they will be confined for another week. So if you are at the end of the first week, says Rava beautifully, everyone agrees, the Koren Publisher, that you are allowed to go. Wow. Why are you allowed to go? Because there is an upside. If the kohen will deem that the partial signs went away, then he'll declare that you are pure. You being declared pure on Chol Hamoed is a reason to go. That's good. He's going to add to your joy. If things are the same, then it's not going to make it worse. It's either not going to make it worse or it's going to get better. So then, why not go? Go. Hold on. Problem is, according to Rabbi Yossi, that a kohen must render a ruling, but things can get worse, asks Tosfos in the bottom. Because if, let's say the hairs turned white, if or the other details were added in the signs of tzaras, there is a downside. So Tosfos innovates the bottom, Tosfos in the Amid, that even according to Rabbi Yossi, who holds that normally, in almost all cases, once a kohen sees the question, he must render a ruling. That is not the case at the end of the first week. At the end of the first week of being confined, everyone agrees that the kohen has an option to say, come back next week. Gewaldig. So since the worst case scenario is everything stays the same. The best case scenario is it gets better. Everyone will agree you should go to a kohen. Ki pligi. Before we get...
What's the question? Why should he go to a kohen? A person's not a mumcha in these things, and he's nervous. He doesn't know what the story is. Knowledge is half the refuah. At least he knows exactly what...
No, it's not. So that's the whole point. So here again, Samach, that's the whole point we spoke out in the beginning. If tzaras is to be viewed as an illness, right? Of course, what kind of mindset is it? Don't go to the doctor. Shoita, go find out what it is. Samach, it's not an illness that's contagious, correct? It's not. You're not going to hurt anyone. You're not avoiding it. You're going to deal with it. But why go to the kohen over Chol Hamoed?
Oh,
because it's v'samachta b'chagecha. So we're breaking gewaldig. Because what we're breaking down is that there's really three options. Things will get better. Things will stay the same. Things will get worse. And as we're working out the details, that as long as there is no option of things getting worse, which is the case of the end of the first week, things will stay the same, which aren't great, but they're going to get better, then everyone will agree that you should go. Where is there an argument before Rebbe? Where do we have the argument of Rav Meir and Rabbi Yossi Zayin Amud Beis? This is Gewaldig, Behez Gersheni. At the end of the second week of confinement, now you should know at the end of the second week, you can't stay the way it is. If things did not get halachically worse, you're going to be declared pure. If things got worse, you're going to be declared confirmed, muchlat. So now let's go. Rabbi Meir, top line, Amud Beis, since he holds Bikoyin Talia Milsa, in other words, his status totally depends on the declaration or the psak of the kohen. And again, Rabbi Meir holds that the kohen has the right, even though the kohen knows what the status is, not to share it now. Come back next week. So again, there's only an upside, because if this confined Mitzvah, if his signs did not get worse, he's going to be declared pure. Good. If it got worse, and therefore the kohen will have to declare that you are a confirmed tzaras, but he doesn't have to say it right now. He'll be quiet. So go to the kohen. MERCAVA, that's Rabbi Yossi. Since the Torah says l'taroy or l'tamoy, from where Rabbi Yossi learns that when a kohen sees the mitzias, he has to declare Torah or Tameh. He cannot. There's no option of silence, since there's a possibility that he will be declared muchlat, which is worse. That's why don't go to the kohen. Now that we narrowed the scenario where there was a machlokes, I mean Rabbi Yossi, now it's gewaldig. Now we're going to have to clarify what the Rebbe holds. And the way we clarify it is actually pointing out a gewaldig contradiction. That there's an opposite versions. Rebbe agrees with Rav Meir in one case and with Rabbi Yossi in another case. But what is the case? You have two braises, each one recording the opposite view of Rebbe. So Amar Mar, we learned before in the brayse that we quoted on Amud Aleph, Amar Rebbe, Didrei, Deroin b'muchlat, Deramei b'musda. That's what we learned over there. No, it's brayse number one, what we will call on Amud Aleph. Rebbe holds that that a kohen may not examine a confirmed mitzvah Why? Maybe we'll work it out again. We'll speak it out in a moment. But Rebbe holds that a kohen is allowed to examine the musgar, is allowed to examine the confined. But we'll call that Brisa number 2. It says the opposite. That the Rebbe allows the confirmed and does not allow the confined. So first of all, it's clear obviously what Rebbe holds, but what will be the rationale behind it? So let me speak out one more intro, and everything fits. It's a beautiful puzzle. The concept is clear, and it's important to remember that the Rebbe agrees in principle with Rabbi Yossi that once a kohen sees the signs of this type of leprosy on one's body, on one's skin, the kohen does not have the option of being silent. Let's begin with that. So now the question is, okay, the concept. When can a person go to a kohen? Whenever halachically there is no downside, if there's only an upside. The question is now, how do you define the downside and how do you define an upside? So let me just tell you a couple of laws. A person who's declared confined, only confined, he doesn't have all of the signs of leprosy, but he's confined. It's called a musga. Such a person is banished from living amongst the people. He has to go michutz lamachna. So already a confined person, and that's the case that we are talking about. He's already michutz lamachna. However, there are details. The details is that he doesn't have to rent his garments. He doesn't have to leave his hair uncut. He doesn't have to walk around declaring about himself, I'm Tomei. Correct. So it's not as bad yet as the confirmed, but a confined is already banished. Another important detail. Even though the only confined Mitzvah is already banished, he cannot live amongst people, but he's allowed to have relations with his wife. His wife can move in with him. So the next step will be that if he becomes a muchlat, if he becomes confirmed, so this is what happens. A confirmed cannot be with a confirmed mitzvah may not be in the camp, but even a confirmed mitzvah, we're going to go with the opinion that will hold, can still be with his wife.
Wait, is he allowed to be?
One second. When the confirmed mitzvah is declared, the signs went away. Now you begin a purification process, which takes 7 days. We're not going to call it the 7 clean days. That term is used by a woman going out of the status of a nida. A mitzvah, it's called 7 purification days. During those 7 purification days, listen to this, he's already allowed in the camp, but he's not allowed to be with his wife. Now, when a person is going from a status where, listen to this question, they can either be with their wives, but not be with everyone else. They have to be outside michutz lamachna, or vice versa. They can be with everyone else, but they cannot be with their wives. Which setting is more painful for a person? Now, obviously, the answer we would give is it depends on the marriage. Yes, but no, the concept. So it says, let's read the words and then we'll put this puzzle together, Kevin, and you'll ask you a question in a moment. So Mar Savar, the second Braisa, right, that holds that Rebbe allows for a confirmed mitzvah to go. A confirmed mitzvah, Chavra, listen, a confirmed mitzvah is someone who may not be with the people, but could be with his wife. If the kohen will deem him still problematic, it didn't get worse. No problem. The only option will be that maybe the signs went away. If the signs went away, the kohen will declare, begin your purification process. What happens when you begin your purification process? You are allowed to go back into the camp, but you're not allowed to be with your wife. So is that something that will dampen the person's joy? So the second Braisa holds, the Ipcha Braisa holds, that since Rebbe holds, Safsa da Alma Adif, if you have to pick between, can I be with the Chevra, can I be with my wife? A person will opt in to be with the people, even if the price is not to be with his wife. So therefore, there's no downside. Yes, if you're going to be deemed still problematic, whatever you were, it continues. The only direction that a confirmed mitzvah can go is to begin the 7-day purification. When you begin the 7-day purification, it's better because now you can already go amongst the people. You're no longer mechutz lamachna. You may no longer be with your wife. It's better for you. The first brayso holds the opposite. That if a person has to choose whether to be with his wife, whether to be with the oilam, his option will be to be with his wife. And even if that means he has to pay the price of not being allowed to be with everyone else. That's the mamish the opposite. Umar savar safsa de ishtoi adifalei. So let's help up. So when a person is confirmed, according to this version, Rabbi will not allow the person to go to a kohen. Because if you are confirmed, if you remain confirmed, everything stays the way it is. You didn't make it worse. But if the kohen will declare you're now beginning your 7 days purification, even though he's allowed to enter the camp, during the 7 days he can't be with his wife. That worsened it. So a confirmed mitzvah is not allowed to go to a kohen. But a person who's only confined, like we mentioned, a confined mitzvah can be with his wife. We hold that the Rebbe holds even a confirmed mitzvah can be with his wife. So there's the person just, can I be with my wife? You can be with your wife like this. You can be with your wife like that. And so there's no downside. If there's no downside, that is why the first brayso holds that a confined person is allowed to go to a kohen. Now, all of this only fits on the premise that even when a person goes from only confined to confirmed, he can still be with his wife, even though he's a confirmed tzayder. He's on the highest level. He's b'chutz lamachne, b'tamei yikra. He has to rent his garment. He can be with his wife. The only time he cannot be with his wife is when he begins the purification process, which is a little bit counterintuitive. Because when a person is beginning their purification process, they're on the way of becoming better. But so holds Rebbe. Based on that, everything fits. Kevin, what's your question?
If he was confined during Chol HaMoed, that means the Kohen saw him before Chol HaMoed.
It's exactly what we're saying. We're saying that the end of the first week was during Chol HaMoed, or the end of the second week was during Chol HaMoed, or there was a change, right, for the worse or for the better on Chol HaMoed.
One should not be going to the Kohen before Chol HaMoed because that ruins their holiday.
No, we don't say that. We don't. Okay, that's okay. Kevin, it's a good observation. We don't extend it that far back. We don't say, don't even go a week before, because if X, Y, and Z, it's going to go in. That we don't do. Very good point, Kate. But on Chol HaMoed, don't do something that will make your situation worse. Beautiful. So, okay, so the Gemara says, Lememra, all of this only fits when we're saying that the Rebbe allows a confirmed. Why does he allow a confirmed? Because it's not going to get worse. A confirmed can be in the second brayso. The first brayso that Rebbe does not allow, Rebbe allows a confined. Rebbe allows a confined is based on the premise that even if he gets confirmed, he can still be with his wife. Remember the mutar v'tashmish hamita? Mar says yes. V'hatanya, as we learned, that's a proof. It says in Parshas Mitzvayim that the Yashav michutz la'ahaloi shivas yamin. During the 7 days through which he's doing his purification process, he should be outside his tent. And you know what that means? Outside your tent. The word tent is a refined way of saying your wife, right? Isha is beisai, beisai is ishtoi. Same thing with the tent. You know that means that during the 7 days you're also b'tash b'shamit. And how do we know? Again, we're speaking about being together with one spouse because the eino halay ela ishtoi shenem alech emor lahem shu lachem la'alech. Okay, so now, since the Torah only says that you cannot be with your wife during the 7 days, so we are understanding it's only during those 7 days. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, I have another proof. It says in Yecheskel, if this is the version, Shivas Yamim Yisperulai, this is also speaking about a Mitzvah, that 7 days shall be counted for him, from where he learns that only Yemei Sefirai, that only during those 7 purification days, is where this Mitzayda, who's on the way of becoming pure, may not be with his wife, but if the person is in the highest stage of Tumas Tzoras, he was confirmed, still he's allowed to be with his wife. Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda argues with that. Obviously, our answer does not follow this Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda, because he says something very logical. That you're right. I know that where did the Torah teach us that a Mitzayda cannot be with his wife, that when he's counting the 7 clean days, he can't be with his wife. But from there, I have a Kal V'chomer, that if he cannot be with his wife, even when he's already on the way of becoming pure, then for sure, when he's muchlat, for sure he cannot be with his wife. That Zayin Yemei Sefiroi is Kal V'chomer L'Mechalutai. So first of all, we see it's a Machlokes Tanoim. And what does Rebbe hold? I want you to know that Danti Lifnei Rebbe, that I was learning this in front of Rebbe, and I told my teacher that Limadetonu Rabbeinu, did the master teach us, or teach us master, and this is going to be a proof like the Tanach, this is going to be a proof like Rabbi Yehuda, this is going to be a proof that even when a Mitzayda is muchlat, he can be with his wife. And the proof is a historical fact that we had a king called Uziyahu, who became a leper, and he continued his reign as he was a leper. After he passed away, his son Yosam took over. So says Rab Chia, master, right? Is it correct that the Yosam, the name of the son, if you follow properly the chronological years of the kings, when they reigned, when they passed away, when the child took over, you will see that Yosam must have been born through a conception that was done by his father while he was already a leper. That is just a proof that even when you're muchlat, you can still be with your wife. And when Rebbe heard that, he concurred, which is great. So now we resolved the contradiction in Brises, and all of that is based on the premise that Meir holds. Ultimately, a Kohen has the option of not rendering a ruling, and Rabbi Yossi and Rebbe hold he has to paskin. But again, if there's no downside, you're allowed to go. The Maiko Mifligi, this question of whether the Isur of Tashmish Hamita goes back to Yemei Chalutai. Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Gali Rachman B'mei Sefiroi. I know that God only told us the law that a Mitzayda cannot be with his wife during the 7 purification count. But for Kolchchein, logically, he's already getting better. He already has that restriction during the Yemei Chilutai. For sure, he may not be with his wife. Umar Sabar, the other Tanaim hold, Ma de Gali Gali, wherever God revealed this halacha taka the azoyidas, Umay de Gali, Loi Gali, Umay de Gali, Loi Gali. I, like Tosfos says, but it's an obvious Kal V'chomer. So Tosfos already introduces something that will happen in the Gemara soon, right? Not mamash for this. The concept that whenever you are learning a halacha that's deemed a chiddush halacha, a novelty halacha, and a novelty halacha means that halacha functions based on certain rules, and there are certain halachas that don't follow those rules. And maybe Kavan, I think you're right. This might be the only place, if it's the only case, where the Kohen has an option not to render a ruling. I don't think there's such a. There are many unique halachas of a Mitzayda that we don't find elsewhere. So once we're speaking about a chiddush law, you can't learn anything from it. Wherever God said, that's where you do it. If God didn't say it, you can't learn. You can't apply it. Says the Gemara. Now, all of this, everyone's shita is concurring that you only become a Mitzayda if the Kohen declares you're a Mitzayda. Right? Unlike an illness, again. If a person is ill, just because they didn't go to the doctor doesn't mean they're well. So the member of the Kohen Talia Milsa, whether they're a Mitzayda or not, or from Mitzayda to Muskar to Muchla to 7 days to whatever, it's all about the Kohen. Yes, in. And amazingly, we're going to have 2 different sources from where we will see that one's becoming a Mitzayda or any change of status in a Mitzayda is only and fully dependent on the declaration of the Kohen. Source number 1, it says in Parshas Tazria, Ubiyoim Heira'os boy, just to know the context. One of the many cases the Torah gives is if a person has these signs of leprosy all over their body, from their head until their toe. It's all white. Amazingly, that person is tahor. If any part of the body later develops a little bit of healthy skin, that's this verse. So on the day that you will show the healthy skin to the Kohen, now the Kohen will declare to be Tameh. Because this heter is only if you're fully white. So on the day that you will show, as we'll see more details in the next daf, on daf ches, either from the extra letter vav or from the entire word ubiyim, we'll see details how to learn it out. From there we learn yesh yom she'atoroyeboy, the yesh yom she'atoroyeboy. All right, there's an option of not looking. What's the option of not looking? We've learned it in our Mishnah. If it's chalamoyet, if looking at this person only has a downside to it, then the Kohen has the option not to look. The Mitzias is the same. I don't care. Until the Kohen declares the person Tameh, that person is not Tameh. Mikan Amru, another case where the Kohen won't look. Hassan means halachically the day that you are getting married, the day not when you get engaged. And going into, if you married someone for the first time, when you have what we call the 7 days of celebration for the next 7 days. So a Hassan, Shenoi Lobei Nega, give the entire 7 days to him, and to whether the leprosy appeared on his body, or whether it's a leprosy that's appearing on his home, or whether it's a leprosy that's appearing on his garments. These are the 3 areas where these signs of leprosy might appear. And v'chein, connected to our topic, Benegel, during Yom Tov. Yom Tov means Chalamoyed. Noistem loy shivas yemei hanegel. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, because and I'll tell you more, like we learned in Amud Aleph, that the initial going to the Kohen has no upside. Like Rava was Machadesh, everyone agrees, don't go. You're taught. The only thing that can happen is something worse. Why would you go? And and only if the Kohen declares you Tameh, you become Tameh. Wait until later. Rabbi says, I don't need your ubiyoim heira to be the source, because I have a better source. What's his better source? Even though it's later, it's in the next portion. It says on Parshas Mitzvah, now this verse is only written regarding Soras Habayis, that if the signs of leprosy appear on one's home, and if the Kohen would declare this home as a home that is a leprosy home, everything in the home becomes Tameh. So it says explicitly in the Chumash, prior to that declaration, remove all of the articles of the home. Like this, you are preventing it from becoming Tameh. Again, I just want to point out that if this leprosy is some sort of illness, can you imagine? How does removing it from the home before the declaration help? But it's not. If it's not in the home when the Kohen made the declaration, you save those articles from becoming Tameh. And that's explicit. It says, that the Kohen should tell the person, guys, first remove everything. That means it's bad news. And at least you saved those articles from becoming impure. So says Rebbe, why is the Kohen delaying judgment? He's only delaying judgment to save your kalim from tumah. There's no mitzvah involved, yet you are allowed to do it. So kol shchein, if there is a dvar mitzvah, you're a chassan, you're celebrating the samachta b'chagecha and Yom Tov. If you will be declared tamei, then the person will have a lesser amount of simcha. He's going to lose the mitzvah. Then for sure the kohen, doesn't have to make that declaration. Point B, it's determined solely on the declaration of the kohen. We're going to stop over here, and we're going to continue learning certain nuanced differences between these two sources and much more with the help of God. All right, guys, I need a little break. I'm going to come back in 2 minutes. Give me 2 or 3 minutes, and I am back. All right, Chevra, vamos. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Moed Katan Daf Ches. We left off on Daf Zayin Amid Base, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We are in the middle of the Sugya. We are learning 2 different sources that teach us that the Tumah of Tzaras, using the words of Chazal, is B'koyen Tal Yemils. Depends fully on the declaration of the Kohen. With the nuance of, does the Kohen even have an option to hold back his ruling, or whether he must give a ruling? Regardless, the Tumah only comes about when he renders his ruling. There is no, since he said that ruling, there's no retroactive Tumah. And again, as we'll go through a couple of more details as we conclude and unpackage the Sugya, we will also see that the Saras signs may not be examined at night. We'll find different sources for that. And on Daf Ches, we're going to start another Mishnah speaking about another topic about not doing activities that can dampen the joy during Chol HaMoed, and that's the following. As some details are written in Yerushalmi, it was common at times in certain places that when a person lost a relative, that relative would be interred, would be buried, l'chatchila only for a small amount of time, in many cases for 1 year, whether it was on the first yard site or prior to that. But when we intuited that the flesh decomposed and all that is left is the skeleton, they would take out the remains. They would be melake the atzamis. They would gather the bones and they would reinter the bones, the remains, with that person's family. So there was like family burial plots, but when someone passed away and the father is there and the grandfather is there and they're going all the way back, they were buried in location A. When someone passed away, they would bury the person in location B for a while, and at some point when there was no flesh left, they would reinter the person together with one's family. And as we will learn, generally there are laws rabbinically of mourning on that day. Yet Rav Meir holds that a person is allowed to do likudat samais on Chol HaMoed, and we'll explain why. Why don't we say, like we learned in the previous sugya, the samachta b'chagecha, don't do things on Chol HaMoed that will dampen your joy? We'll see that. We will also learn a little bit about eulogizing and limitations to eulogizers, also connected to Yom Tiv. On Daf Ches Amid Beis, we're going to have another Mishnah that's going to speak about tircha yisera. So just like we learned on Daf Zayin, this concept of different levels of damage, like hefsid meruba, we're going to learn now about exertion. So we learned about excessive exertion, but we're going to learn about levels into that and how that will affect those things that we may or may not do on Chol HaMoed. And another clarity that we will have is that during the times of Chazal, there were 2 styles of burial plots. Style number 1 is that they used to build catacombs, which means that they would build underground like a cave, under the ground, and in the cave's walls they would hew out horizontal little slots, and in them people would be laid to rest. The other way they would bury is that they would build a little building above the ground in which they would bury the person who passed away. Now, until today, it's common in many places, like in Eretz Harazes, that today we bury in the ground. But over that location, they don't just put like a stone or a marble, matseva on the ground. They build something up. And they build like a box above the ground. And it's almost as if you can put someone in that box. Right? All of the Bay, right? Kevin keeps on posting from Tzfasir HaKodesh, all these holy places where tzaddikim are interred, that you have above the ground, you have like this, and it covers the entire body, like this big mound. They used to bury people in it in the times of Chazal. And we'll see how all of that will relate to the dinim of Chol HaMoed. We're going to have on Daf Ches Amid Beis the other Mishnah that's going to speak about getting married on Chol HaMoed. The concept, we're going to begin the sugya of ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. We don't mix one joy with the other. We're going to learn other details about sewing on Chol HaMoed and many other activities which may or may not be permitted on Chol HaMoed. Without any further ado, Chavra Daf Zayin Amid Beis, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid, we're learning the sugya of Saras on Chol HaMoed, whether you could show it to a Kohen, whether you may not show it to the Kohen, And all of that is based on the premise that the Tuma is totally dependent on the declaration of the Kohen. And when he makes that declaration, it's not like when a doctor discovers an illness. So the illness doesn't begin with the declaration of the doctor. The illness began before. It's not the case by Tzoras. It begins by his declaration. So we have either the source from a pasuk in Tazria, Ubi Yoim Heira Oisboy, or the other opinion holds that it's learned from a pasuk that we have in Parshas Mitzayda, where the Torah says explicitly that when the Kohen knows in his mind that he is going to declare the house a house of leprosy, remove the articles in the house because they will only become tamei when he makes that declaration. And when that happens, whatever's in the house becomes tamei. So the solution to avoid that tumah is to remove it. So my benayim, first of all, is there any halachic difference between the source? So two approaches. Abaya holds, Amar, Abaya, 3 lines before the bottom. Remember this expression, Mashma ois darshan iko benayu. There is not a halachic difference, but when you learn a pasuk in the Chumash, you have to know how to interpret it. That's a iko benayu. So when the Torah says, Ubi yoim heira ozvoi, again, the context of that version, of that verse, as we spoke out in the last class, is that when a person has signs of leprosy from his head until the toe, fully white, for some reason that person is tahor. But if there is a little bit of healthy skin that develops anywhere in the person's body, so it says that on the day that you show it to the Kohen and he sees, aha, there is some healthy flesh, you're tamei. So what is that on the day? How do you learn pshat? Doesn't mean that there are days that b'chlal you don't show it to the Kohen, or does it not mean that? Does it mean something else? If it means something else, then it's not a source. Then you have to go to Parshas Mitzayda. So the nafkamina is how to darshan sukkim. Rava Amar, no, it's not true. Aside of that, aside of Mashma's darshan, there is a practical nafkamina that Rava Amar dvar harashos ikabenayu. According to Rebbe, who compares bodily tzoras to a house tzoras, just like you are allowed to tell, the Torah says, the Kohen tells the person, remove your articles from your home. It's not bettering the performance of a mitzvah. It's just preventing your own financial loss. That is also a reason why one can delay going to a Kohen, not showing the signs of leprosy. It doesn't have to be only because of a mitzvah. Right? But if you learn it from Ubiyoim Heirais, then you will argue that the only times you can delay going to a Kohen, if it's because there is a Hassan, or if it's because it's Chol HaMoed, but only Ledvar HaRashus, you may not. Now, everyone agrees that when it comes to the leprosy of the house, even if it's not mitzvah related, we can take actions, which the Torah tells us to take, to prevent financial loss, non-mitzvah related. The only question is, can we compare bodily tzoras, lekula, to the house tzoras? So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda holds that you can compare body tzoras, personal tzoras, to house tzoras, because like we mentioned, we quoted the Tosfos in the last year, but when it comes to the laws of leprosy, there are chidushim. A chidush means there are certain rules that don't follow the klali halacha. Daf on the top. For example, you should know that certain types of woodware, flat woodware, kalim that are flat, made out of wood, never become tamei. But you know what? Once the house is declared a house that is a leopard house, kalim in the house, even kalim that otherwise would not become tamei, flat earthenware, flat woodenware, or any kalim made out of stone, a receptacle, they will become tamei. So since there's a chiddush, you can't learn anything from it. However, but again, Rebbe holds that you could learn one from the other. There's only one challenge. The challenge is that if you don't go with Mashmoy's darshan, if you don't go with that, because if you're going to go with Rava's answer to exclude Abayim, if you're going to understand that really you have two sources, both V'tziva HaKohen Upino Asabayis, which is about homes, but if you hold that you can learn the body from the home, then you have another verse, Ubiyoim Heiraz boy. Why do you have to have two psukim telling you the same thing? So the Rebbe Amar, again, okay, it's very good. This is all behemshich to Rava, not to Abayim. That I agree that you can learn it from Ubiyoim Heiraz. It's If you only would have had that pasuk, however, therefore the Torah has to write in Parshas Mitzvah V'tziva Kohen, and V'tziva Kohen upinu as habayis has nothing to do with mitzvahs. So why isn't that enough? Because indeed, I would also agree. Hani in the lav tuma de gufay, not the chidusha loy gamrinon. But let's not forget that the tuma in the house is not on the person. So maybe only over there are you allowed to be lenient, even not mitzvah related, to delay the declaration of the kohen. Avol tuma de gufay, ema. Maybe you would think that nechsa chazile that you must show it to the kohen ASAP. So that's why it's very good. Omar Mar says the Gemara we learned in the Braisa from the pasuk ubeyoim heira oizbay that on the day it says end on the day that you will show healthy flesh to the kohen has to declare that person now tummy, and that was the limit. The ubeyoim tells you that yesh yoim she'ataroyaboy v'yesh yoim she'ataroyaboy. Asks the Gemara my mashma. How do you see from the words ubeyoim that there are times in which you don't even have to show it to a kohen? So Amar Abaya, because in Cain there is an extra vav. Lichtay v'rachmana biyoim on the day. My ubeyoim and on the day shmanino this yeshem shataroyboy the yeshem shiataroyboy. Rava Amar, it's more than just a letter vav. Kulei kra you say to whom. The MK lichtay v'rachmana uvehei ra'ois. Bechlal don't write the word day. My ubiyoim shmamino yeshem shataroyboy the yeshem shiataroyboy. Now Rava's point is so good that the Abaya has to explain himself. Why is he only holding that the vav is extra? Taka the whole word is extra. It says the Gemara. Abaya agrees that the entire word is extra, but there's something else that we need the word biyoim to teach us. So we can learn this additional limud because of the additional letter. Abaya hahu biboyele to tell you another law. That only biyoim b'loy b'layla, that when may a kohen look at any sign of leprosy, dafka during the daytime of the day and never during the night. The Rava, biyoim b'loy b'layla minole. So Rava says, I know it from another pasuk. It says, melachol mara einei hakohen, pasuk in Tazria, right? That wherever the eyes of the kohen can see, well, his eyes have to be able to see it. Abaya says, no. That pasuk in Tazria, Miboyele is coming to tell you another thing. That if a kohen doesn't have eyes in the plural, if God forbid he is blind even only in one eye, that kohen is not longer qualified to examine signs of tzaras. And you know what? Rava is moed. Rava agrees that the melachol mara kohen is to exclude a kohen who's suma even only ba'achas me'enav. Right, and Achanami, the Elo again, Rava, who says that the entire ubiyoim is used to tell you the limud yesh yoim v'yesh yoim. How does he know that a kohen may not look at signs of tzaras during the night? The Elo answers the Gemara Nafkalei from another pasuk where it says that mikenege nira li baboyis, that when a person, this pasuk is in the parsha of Soras Habayis, thinks that, it's either the colors are green or red with many details, exactly how must they appear, where must they appear. But if the person, the owner, thinks that what he's seeing, these signs, this discoloration of the stones of the home, is green and red, he doesn't tell the kohen that I see Soras. Something that appears like, it's a good learn. You have to be careful not to say something negative. Something that appears like a tzaras is appearing to me, li. So we have a limud. It's appearing to me without the help of a candle. To me, the way it is, I can see it. Li v'loyla oiri. To me, naked. To me, without the additional help of an oir of a candle. The Abaya will tell you, good, very nice. I agree that this verse that's speaking about Soras Habayis is a source that Soras should only be seen at day and not at night when you need to have a candle. But again, that pasuk is speaking about Soras Habayis. The Soras of a body is considered something more chamur because it's on the person's body. So Habayis says, since it's not as serious to begin with because it's not on the body, that is where, even though at night you know that there's a problem, you delay it until the day. But when the tumor is on the person's body, one might have thought, again, you may not even delay going to the kohen, and therefore even if the only way of examining to see whether the signs are signs of tzoras or not is by using some external help, which will be at night, a torch, fire, electricity, kumash malan, that even by tzoras the gufe, so ubayom is used, so you can only learn yesh yoim from the extra letter vav, and with this we conclude the sugya of tzoras.
That way, there's no point where they compare checking of a tzoras with a woman checking her blood. There's no comparison of the two and the hours that it may be checked.
So I want to say like this regarding to what Kevin is saying, just to know, if you remember in Megillah, when we were learning the sugya of the 7, Danny Fishman is not here, good, the 7 prophetesses, or the 7 prophetesses that Abigail, like she was the one that she was going after David HaMelech, and she was with Chachma, she was getting him not to render a ruling that her husband Naval is Chayev Misa. And the way she did it, Chachma, remember I came in that she went with she had a mother. There was a stain of blood on a cloth whose color was questionable. So she went to show it to David, and David said David said, no, you can't. You're not allowed to look at this at night. So she said, yeah, you're right. Shkoyach, Take, you know what? You also cannot do at night. You can't render a capital case at night either. That whole Moed Malchus, you're not get a king, you're not a known king, whatever that back and forth was. But I want you to know like this, that halacha l'maisa, nowadays, when a sign of a nida or potential nida is shown to a rav, if it's a sign that's borderline between a problematic or a non-problematic color, borderline, Hitaka does not look at it at night to electricity. But you should just know that there are certain matters that are so clearly problematic or so clearly non-problematic that you should just know there are times that the Rav is allowed, even with the light, which will make things look redder or make things look not redder, he can still render such piskei dinim at night as well. With all the other problems. Okay. You're right, Kevin, there is a correlation. And even during the day, you have to look at it in the shade of the sunlight. Okay, moving on to the Oid Amar Rav Meir. Rav Meir, if you remember, on Daf Zayin, he was the lenient opinion. He was the one that held that even after a kohen looks at the signs of leprosy, he has the option of not rendering a ruling. And therefore, there were certain scenarios where even though there is a downside, but since the kohen doesn't have to render a ruling, and there is also an upside, Rav Meir advocates go to the kohen on Chol Hamoed, which is a leniency, the fact that he doesn't have to render a ruling. So va'oid means there is another kula that we find uniquely from Rabbi Meir. And why does that? Like we spoke on in the intro, that during the times where it was relatively common for there to be 2 burials, the initial burial after the passing, the waiting of the period of time that it takes for the flesh to decompose, then the Yom Likud Atzomis, the day that they would reinter by gathering now only the bones, and they would rebury, they would reinter the bones together with this person's ancestors. So says Rabbi Meir, Malakid Adam Atzomis Aviv V'imo. You are allowed to reinter on Chol Hamoed. Why? The Blemishes Simcha Hiloi. Now we're going to read Rashi, what we call Rashi. Clearly, we're going to see in the Gemara that what Rashi is saying is not the maskana, but the initial understanding of these words is that that there is a joy, there is a simcha by the fact that you are reinterring this person together with his ancestors, and it won't bring about sad. There won't be pain involved. So that's why it's allowed. We'll get back to this in the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi Omer, he disagrees. And the Bechal, we know that even though in the Mishnah Daf Zayin, in our version, it's the Chachamim that argue with Rav Meir, but as we learned, the Chachamim is Rabbi Yossi. So this is another machlokes between Rav Meir and Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi is the Machmer. Eivel huloi. No, the opposite. The day in which one reinters becomes a day of mourning. And therefore, again, you're not allowed to bring about mourning that you could have delayed on Chol Hamoed. Din number 2. Now, this number 2 again will be unpackaged in the Gemara. Lo ye'oirer adam al meisoi. What people would hire, again, I'm speaking out only one opinion. they would hire professional eulogizers. And what they would do is that after 30 days already passed, and there was a certain lessening of the deep pain that one feels because of the passing of a close relative. So they would hire a eulogizer, and he would go around and he would inspire more pain. He would actually speak to other people who had losses, and he would reawaken the ruach of mourning. So the Mishnah says that one may not do that, nor Feloi Yispidenu Koidem Larego. And we're following one approach in the Gemara, that you may not pay a professional eulogizer to give a eulogy if the burial and this eulogy will be given within 30 days of Yom. Interesting. And as Rashi points out, that when a person feels, we'll see over here, a certain amount of pain, it takes 30 days or more for that pain to subside. Now, the second case in the Mishnah is that the passing was within 30 days. Since the passing was within 30 days, not, again, according to one shita, paying a eulogizer, how would that help? So we'll see in the Gemara more, machlokes, how to understand this whole concept of either inspiring pain by eulogizing after 30 days of the passing, or even if the passing, it's within 30 days, but the passing itself is within 30 days of Yom Tov. There's some step that we may not do, which will extend the pain into Yom Tov, as we will see more details in the Gemara. So first of all, going back to the first din in the Mishnah, regarding are we or are we not allowed to be malaked atzamas? I have a contradiction. We learned in a Braisa, that on the day that the person gathers these bones, you're obligated to have a one rabbinic day of Avelus. But it's a limited amount of time. It's only for that day. It doesn't even go into the night post. And not only that, for Amar Rav Chizda, that's not only if the bones were left exposed, but even if the sheet, the tachrichen, is not decomposed. So when they gathered the bones, they didn't see or have direct contact with the bones, which to a certain level lowers, diminishes, the pain is not as heavy. That also may not be done. So how can Avmeir say you do it? Now let me just break this down into two steps. Step number one is, everyone knows that even though, true, on the day of Likud Atzamas, there is a rabbinic 1 day of mourning, that cannot happen on Chol HaMoed. As we know nowadays, no one should know, but if someone, God forbid, is even sitting Shiva, if Yom Tov comes in middle of Shiva, it breaks the Shiva. If Yom Tov comes in the middle of the Shloshim, it shortens the Shloshim. If there is a passing that happens on Yom Tov, you only begin the Shiva after Yom Tov. In other words, the fact that we have a Braisa that you have to keep 1 day of halachic abelus on the day of Likud Atzamas, we understand it doesn't mean that on Chol HaMoed you'll have to keep that day of mourning. No, it doesn't happen that way. If a person passes away on Chol HaMoed, there's no Avelus on Yom Tov. However, there's two parts to Avelus. There is the keeping of the laws of mourning, and then there is the tsar, the pain that you feel. And even when there is no halachic obligations of following through with the laws of Avelus, but you feel pain, was the fact that Chazal said that on the day of Likud Atzamas, you're mechuyev to fulfill the laws of Avelus. Why did they say that? Because they know that the mitzias is you feeling tzad. So even like nowadays, God forbid, if a person loses one of the 7 close relatives over Yom Tov, what, just because they're not keeping the laws of Avelus, what, they don't feel tzad, they feel tzad. So when someone passes away, that's God's doing. God is, dayon ha'emes. God determines when a person will move on to the next level. But for us to choose the day of Likud Atzamas, how can Avneir say it's permissible? It brings about pain. Don't choose to bring yourself into pain on Chol HaMoed. That's the kasha. So Amar Abaye, you have to reread the words of Avneir, and what Rashi wrote in the Mishnah is not this. Here's the word. Since a person is in a very heightened state of simcha, because of simchas hachag, that person then won't feel the pain that you normally feel when you do likodat summers. It's amazing. In other words, the meaning was then, the halach yelech was to do likodat summers. So people would dread it. Why would I do likodat summers? And to imagine undigging and gathering the bones, it's going to get done. Rav Meir says, you know what, do it on a time where it will hurt you the least, and you won't even feel the pain. You're so besimcha because of Yantiv, that will diminish the pain to the point, do it on Cholamoid. Interesting approach. Let's go back. The next thing in the Mishnah was about this either hiring lamenters, professional eulogizers, even if it happened many days after the passing, beyond 30 days of the passing, to bring back the mourning. Don't bring it back within 30 days of Yom Tiv, nor make a hesped within 30 days of Yom Tiv. What does it mean? My lo ya'ar al meisoi. So Amar Rav says that kad hador sabdona b'marava, that these professional eulogizers that would go around in Eretz Yisrael, what they would say was, how would they bring back, how would they reawaken the mourning, is that they would find other people that are in mourning, and they would gather everyone together. They would look, they would say, Yifkun ime kol medina liba. Who else had a loss? You know, we inspire each other in both directions. So if you want to be besimcha, hang around people that are besimcha. And here, if the goal was to bring people back into a deeper state of mourning, they would gather others who are also in their mourning. Oi, this person had that loss. Oi, and that person had that tragedy, and the other one had that tragedy. And that is how they would bring back that level of mourning, which you may not do. Why 30 days? Now this is going on the latter case in the Mishnah. That don't, again, according to Rav, it's not about giving a eulogy, it's about not paying for a eulogy. If the person passed away within 30 days, why happens to 30 days? So here's the answer. It was a person. Going up to the Beis HaMikdash was a trip that costed money. Trips cost money. So people knew they're going to the Aliyah, and they would set aside money. Happened once that such a person who had money set aside lost a close relative. Uba Saftan came along, this professional eulogizer, and he went to this person's house to offer his services. The person wasn't there. The wife took the money that she had set aside and she paid the eulogizer. So the eulogy was not beautiful, but this person, this family had no money to make Aliyah L'Regel. So then is where they made this decree. The last line of the Amid. So Rav learns that both, whether it is getting someone to reawaken the feelings of sadness, and not paying a eulogizer, if someone passed away within 30 days of Yom Tiv, it's all connected only with paying for it. And by the way, this is not only true when we have the mitzvah of going up to the Beis HaMikdash, even pre the building of the third Beis HaMikdash, Yom Tov cost money. And the magic of 30 days is, like we learned, and we mentioned this in Megillah, and we had this in Psachim, that we actually begin learning about the Hilchos HaPesach 30 days before Pesach. We're not going to follow the 2 weeks, but 30 days before Yom Tov, you're getting into the mindset of Yom Tov is coming. And part of that is, for the people who have to pay for it, they start figuring out, how am I going to put together the finances for Yom Tov? So any expense that is not a necessity, like over here, you don't have to pay a professional eulogizer, avoid for you not to have less money for Yom Tov. Very importantly, it's only connected to the money that you have to put out of pocket. Shmuel Bechlal disagrees with this approach. Shmuel Amar Daf Chesam and Beis. No, it's about not feeling sad. Since there is a rule that when a person is connected to the sadness because of a passing, it takes 30 days for that sadness to go away. So therefore, now, if the person passed away within 30 days of a Yom Tov, that's the fact. But not to go and make a eulogy, even if not for money, it's gonna heighten the sense of sadness, and that is going to go into Yom Tov. Don't do that. And now it's simple. What's the difference? My benai between Av and Shmuel. What happens if you have a professional eulogizer that knows how to make people really cry, but they do it for free? If the whole issue is about not having money that you set aside for Yom Tiv, then you're not allowed to do it. Then if it's for free, you can do it. According to Shmuel, you may never do it. It's interesting how the koyach of the eulogizer is that they make something sad that much sadder. For the sake of clarity, that it's important to note that during a Yiddish funeral, the goal of whoever speaks, if you are giving speeches, is to make people cry, to make that very clear. There's a time for crying, there's a time for laughter. Some people very wrongfully choose that moment to evoke memories that lighten the mood. And that's not the time. The time of a hesped, the goal of a hesped is to make people cry. Or don't make a commitment. There's reasons why by us and Chabad we don't give a spadim, which is very important, because if you're going to over eulogize, you're going to speak about the qualities of the deceased. That is not true. Those words will be held against the deceased. And if you're going to under eulogize, then you are bringing about the terrible insult. If the person is greater than the way you're speaking, so it's not so, you have to know what you're doing. And we don't give a eulogy during the burial. But just the goal of these words is dafka to evoke tears. And again, lishmol, it's not about money. Don't do that if you are within 30 days of Yom Tov. Now, I just want to mention something. Kevin made a very good point in the last Sunnah, Daf Zayin, when we were speaking about showing leprosy to a client on Chol HaMoed. He asked a question, right, Kevin? What about showing leprosy 3 days before Yom Tov? The Mishnah did not address that. L'chayra, there was no restriction prior to Yom Tov, even though there it would mean that if you will be found a leper, you're going to be Yom Tov in a state of tumah. That is not as bad. There's different levels of sadness. That's one thing, and this obviously is much worse. The level of sadness connected to the passing is so deep that even prior to the Yom Tov, we don't do certain things, so there shouldn't be even a deeper feelings of sadness in Yom Tov, because v'samachta b'chagechom. Let's go right. Other details about burials connected to passing, and B'chal Moed Katan, which deals with Chol HaMoed, all of the laws of Avelos are in this Masechta. That's the ground zero for Hilchos Avelos. They used to bury people in underground caves, but not in the ground, but in the walls that they would build in the caves. So says our Mishnah, Ein choifrim kuchen. I don't know if that picture is a good picture. You may not dig these kuchen, as the Gemara will clarify, which are these niches in the walls of a cave, nor dig kvaros. Kvaros are buildings that are above the ground, made mainly out of stone, in which they would lay the person who passed away. You may not dig these graves on Chol HaMoed. Now, Chavod, this is very important. You should know that when it comes to digging a grave for a specific individual, you may not do it only after the person passed away. And Al Pi Kabbalah, only on the day that you're burying them, not before. What we are speaking in our Mishnah is that a community, a large city, that knows that on average, X amount of people pass away every day. So it was common for them to pre-dig many burial sites, not for any specific individual, but just to have them available for those who will pass away. That's our discussion. If you're digging graves for them to be available, to be determined for whom, that is allowed to be pre-dug. However, that may not be done on Chol HaMoed because it's considered strenuous labor. However, if you already had such burial plots pre-dug, however, they have to be tweaked. They have to be made a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, or a little bit smaller. That's called mechanchen. If you only have to adapt them, then you aren't allowed to do it. Mechanchen is akuchen. These niches can be adapted on Moed because there is a necessity to have them. So there's a balance over here. Okay. Another thing, this is a huge topic. Nivreches is some sort of laundry pool of water. Now, we all know that laundering garments on Chol HaMoed is prohibited, but there are certain exceptions. And because of the fact that there are exceptions, one is allowed to dig this type of laundry pool. They would have a pool in the ground that would hold water. And as we'll see, these were relatively shallow pools, and the amount of exertion to dig them was minimal. And when you weigh that towards the benefit of having that water available, you are allowed to do it. Another din. So we began with graves, we went to laundry, and we're coming back to the passage that we are allowed to build a casket. When a building on Cholamayit is prohibited. If there is a mace in the Chatzar, people won't think that you're stam building, then you can build the casket, even though you're not building it in the Chatzar, even though you're building the casket in a home that opens up to the Chatzar. But the fact that people are aware that there is a mace right here, they're going to understand that the sounds of building is about building the casket. Rabbi Yehuda is a little bit more machmir. Rabbi Yehuda said, Elam kain yesh imay nesarim. So you have pre-cut wood, which means that building the casket is that much easier versus cutting out the wood from a log, from a tree, which is that much harder. Rabbi Yehuda says that you are allowed to build a casket only if you have pre-cut wood, and not, again, if you without the pre-cut wood, it's too much exertion. Says the Gemara. First of all, what's kuchen, what's kvaris? What's nishes and what's a kaver? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, kuchen is bechfira. Kuchen is the little horizontal openings they would make in the walls of underground catacombs. And kvaris is bebinyan. They would build above the ground a pile of stones or a little building, and in it they would have the space to lay the person. So even though you may not make mass public graves on Cholamayit, if you already made them and they only need to be adapted, so what does that mean? Adapting it goes both ways. If it was too long, you can make it shorter. You put a stone in, you put some earth in, which is even very little exertion. And then Baraisa, we learned even a little bit more exertion. You can even make it longer, or you can make it wider. Again, since you're not doing it fresh, it's not that much work, and therefore you are allowed to do it. Next thing is v'oisim nevrachas. You can make a wash pond, a laundry pond. My nevrachas, Amar Yehuda, that's called a bakia, a pond. It says in the Braisa that you can make a nevrachas and a bakia, which means it's not the same. So Abaya clarifies it. There's the gia, there's the primary pond, that's called the nevrachas, and the bakia is called the bar gia, the secondary pond. Both of them can be made on Cholamayit. Says in the Mishnah, you are allowed to make a casket as long as the mace is in that yard. So now, as we have in our Mishnah, we have now aligned with that the following brayso. You can do all of the needs for someone who passed away on Cholamayit. We're speaking about Cholamayit, which means, for example, you can cut their hair. People that have the schus to be part of Chevra Kadishas, of Chesed Shalemis. So there's different menagim nowadays, right? If Shuki here is part of, whoever's part of these Chevra Kadishas will know that here they don't cut the hair, they don't cut the nails, they clean. At least they don't cut the hair, to my knowledge. You wash their shrouds. Today people buy new shrouds, you get from the Chevra Kadisha the shrouds. Then people had their own shrouds, and some of them were not that clean. You could launder shrouds. That's one of the exceptions where you may launder on Cholamayit. And you are allowed to build a casket. However, only like we have in our Mishnah from Rabbi Yehuda, only if the boards were pre-cut. That af medviin eitzim, you are even allowed to begin the process of making the autumn, cutting out the wood from the trunk of a tree, but only b'tzina b'toich beisai. In other words, there's more privacy there. It's less noticeable, also only because there is a mace in the chutzah. But if it's going to be that this in-between opinion, if you are going to be making a casket anew, then do that in your home and not in the yard. Next mission. Moving on. So amazing. Atkan, we were learning about don't do activities that can dampen the joy. And now we're going to actually say something that might be counterintuitive. One might think that celebrating a joyful occasion on Cholamayit is the way to go, because Says the Mishnah, Ein noisin nashim b'moed. We may not marry women on Chalamoyed. We're not speaking about Kedushin. We're speaking about Nesuyin. The kids nowadays, Kedushin and Nesuyin are both done under the chuppah. In the times of Chazal, the Kedushin part of the marriage, which is translated as engagement, but that's a very inaccurate English translation. The Kedushin was done at times 12 months prior. It's when the man gives the woman one way a item that has value, K'minig Yisrael, a ring and a golden ring, and dafka a round golden ring without anything engraved in the ring. So that is not what we're speaking about. We're speaking about the second and final step of the marriage, Nesuyin, that may not be done on Chalamoyed, regardless whether you are marrying a woman that was never married before Psula, whether a person is marrying a widow, or if there is a case where Yibum is necessary, right? So if there's Reuven married Rachel, and Reuven passes away without having any children, not from Rachel, not from a prior marriage, not, God forbid, out of marriage, not even a mamzer, God forbid, no children, no descendants. And if Reuven leaves a brother or brothers, there is a automatic halachic bond, zika. It's called zika, a bond between the widow and the brother or brothers, and that has to be dealt with either by cutting that bond off by doing an act of chalitza, or by doing yibum, which is basically marrying, the brother is marrying his wife's widow, which is a tremendous novelty, because you should know that one brother may never marry his brother's wife, even after they are not together. Only in this case are they allowed in a mitzvah called yibum. You can't do yibum on Chalamoyed. How amazing is that? That should be a reason why you should get married on Chalamoyed. The Gemara will explain what that means. However, there's only one type of marriage that is permitted, which is called someone who's machzir es girushas. The man divorced his wife. As long as she did not remarry, as long as the original husband is a non-kohen, kohen cannot marry a divorcee, even if it's his divorcee. So if a man is remarrying his wife, his ex-wife, that is allowed to be done on Chalamoyed, because the simcha is not that intense. Again, you would argue the more simcha, the better. Not here. So that's the only exception. Another din, the oisa isha tach shitel b'moed. A woman is allowed to tend to her both hygienic needs and to put on cosmetics and makeup. That is allowed to be done on Chalamoyed. However, Rabbi Yehuda gives one exception. Rabbi Yehuda loisasud, that there was a certain type of application of lime that was common then. That woman would put lime on their bodies, and then they would rip off the lime, and that would be some sort of depilatory that would take off their hairs. That may not be done on Chalamoyed, because even though in the long term it beautified them, but the immediate effect was mipnei shenivul hula. It would make the skin look very red and bring about rashes. There would be a short-term, not attractive effect, and because of that, you cannot do it on Chalamoyed. Next thing in the Mishnah is about sewing. Obviously, we're speaking about garments that you need for Yom Tov, but still, can you sew? So it depends. If you are a hedyot, a lay person, you're not skilled, even when you do the best you could, it's not professional, then yes, toifer kedarkoi, just stitch up what you need to stitch up. That's what's not mentioned, but you should know that's only because the garment you need either for Chalamoyed or for Yom Tov. But if you think you are a professional tailor, then machlev, you have to purposefully use a unusual stitch to make a shinoi. Next, the way they had beds in the times of Chazal is they had a bed frame like we do, but the mattress or the hay, whatever it is that the person slept on, was laying on ropes that were intertwined and woven on the outer boundaries of the bed frame. So says the Mishnah, you are allowed to be mesadig, to interlace the strings, the ropes on the beds upon which to put the mattress. You are allowed to do that on Chalamoyed. And Rabbi Yossi says, Mematchen, you are allowed to tighten them. Let's leave all these details for the Gemara. We're going to focus now on the first law of the Mishnah. With aside of the exception of someone who's machzir as gerushasai, the Mishnah taught us the halacha ein noisim nashim b'moyed nach mepnei simchi hiloi. It's like the Gemara v'chi simchi hiloi mayhava. That's the reason why you should be allowed, not why you're not allowed. So we're going to have four approaches, four answers. Number one, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Chen Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Oishia, or Amri Lav, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Chanina. These are the words. Lefi she'ein ma'arvin or ma'arvin simcha v'simcha. We do not intermingle one joy with another joy, because when you focus on one, you detach yourself from the other. So when you're going to focus on the joy of the marriage, you will be a bit detached from the joy of Yom Tov, including Chalamayit. More about this soon, and primarily tomorrow's shiur will begin with more. What's the source of that? But that's answer number one. Now, this is a very broad term, disallowing not only marriages, many other types of joyous celebrations, thus may not be celebrated during Chalamayit. Approach number two is unique for marriage. Rabba barafuna amar because marriage is the greatest simcha and it's unique. Same concept, but unique to marriage. Because of the unique, great joy of getting married, you will focus on your marriage and on the joy of the marriage, but on the cheshbon on the account of simchas haregel, and therefore you are diminishing simchas haregel. I want you to know that this which you quoted in the name of Rabba Bar Rafuna is actually the opinion of Rav. The Omar of the Neo Barkatino Omar of Minayin She'ei Noisim Noshim B'Mayit. Again, that there's a specific problem with marriage, not this broader Ein Ma'avin Simcha B'Simcha. And the pasuk is She'nema V'Samachta B'Chagecha. From where we learned B'Chagecha V'Loi B'Ishtecha. And you see, the emphasis is not on marriage. According to the first approach, it would have been V'Samachta B'Chagecha V'Loi nothing else. Okay. Approach number three. Ula Amar. Why can you not marry on Chalamayit? Again, so we have this concept of a tircha yisera, excessive exertion. Marriage and the hachanas for marriage and the celebrations during the marriage, it's very joyous, but there's a lot of work. So it is the tircha which will diminish from the simcha of Yom Tov, including Chalamayit. And approach number four, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Amar, the Pnei Bittul Pidi of Edidia. Practical answer. And the way the Rishonim explain, making a marriage is expensive, especially when you're doing Shema Brachas. I know some people, they figured out, thank God, in many places, how to really bring down the costs of the wedding itself. But all of a sudden, you make a Shabbos Shema Brachas, and you have the family, and you get a hotel. It can be very, very pricey. And Bachlal, food is expensive for people that are not wealthy. The amounts of people you have to feed, it's a cost. So to save money, it would only make sense if we would be allowed to get married during Yom Tov, What's the advantage? Anyways, you're spending money for the food to feed the families on Yom Tov. Anyways, many people have many guests over for Yom Tov. The weddings then were not like today. So you can, kill two birds with one stone. If you would be allowed to get married on Chalamayit, people would wait until Chalamayit to get married. To save money, because the money that you're spending for Yom Tov can cover already the meals, the su'udah, connected not only to the marriage itself, but we'll see soon to the days after the marriage. So the Shema Brachas will tweak this in a moment. And what's wrong with that? It's terribly wrong, because once a person decides with whom they're getting married, the Rebbe was very strong with that. Once a Hassan and Kala becomes what we call today a Hassan and Kala, the Rebbe wanted for them to get married ASAP. Certainly, in part, because of this idea. Why would you delay it? So if you don't know whom you're going to marry, you can't get married. Once you determine with whom you're getting married, get married as soon as possible. And if you would be allowed to get married in Chalamayit, everyone would delay their chasanas hanisuyin until the next Yom Tov. Person can get engaged in Cheshvan. The heir's going to wait until Pesach. Bittul piri of it. Now we have another few minutes. The Gemara is going to ask a question on all of the four opinions. You have to work it out. Meisvei says in a Braisa, all of the women which is what the Mishnah says, a psulam, an almana, even a yavama. When you can't get married on Chol HaMoed, daf tes, you are allowed to marry them erev haregel. You can marry them even on the eve, erev Yom Tov, and now you have a kasha for everyone. Let's work it out. If the issue is Eima Arvan Simcha B'Simcha, the second one that says unique for marriage. So what, guys? The Simcha of the wedding is not only the night of the wedding. You have 7 days of celebration. If a person marries a woman that was married before, but there are 3 days of celebration. Well, the Simcha extends. Eima Arvan Simcha B'Simcha. Or V'samachta b'chagecha v'lo b'ishtecha. If the problem is toidach, same question. I know that there's the night of the wedding, and here the Braisa is allowing for you to have that the day before Yom Tov, but there is the tircha of preparing the meals for the week afterwards. That goes into Yom Tov. And even when it comes to the concept of bittul piri v'rivya, so I get it that you can't do it on Yom Tov, all right? But if you will be allowed to do it erev Yom Tov, l'chu'ura, people will also delay their marriage until Yom Tov. It's true, you're not saving the wedding night, but you're going to be putting together the meals for Yom Tov with the meals of what we call Shana Brachas. So why should that be allowed? The Gemara says, Loi Kasha. We're going to work everything out. Whether that's Eima Arvan Simcha B'Simcha in a broader way, whether that's specific to marriage, since Iker Simcha is only Chad Yoyma means the day of the wedding day itself. Even though, of course, there is also Simcha during the Sheva Brachas. It's not a Bechlal on the same level. It doesn't diminish the Simcha of Chol HaMoed. Laman the Amar, it's because of the Tircha of preparing the meal. Here also the Gemara argues that the main Tircha is the wedding day and the Su'udah of the Nesuyin itself, and not later. And that won't diminish. And even Laman the Amar, the Gemara gives a very practical answer. And it's very interesting. When a person designates a date for marriage, it's good to have a plan B. And no one wants for the plan B to be much later than plan A. So if a person would be allowed to get married on Chol HaMoed, then a person would mark their wedding for Erev Yom Tov or for the first day Chol HaMoed. And if it doesn't work out the first day, it'll be the second day. Now that we are allowing marriages to happen only Erev Yom Tov, but not during Yom Tov, not during Chol HaMoed, no one will delay the marriage to Erev Yom Tov because there's no plan B. Plan B is waiting a full week later. Interesting concept. Says the Gemara that person won't risk it. We'll stop here in the Gemara. Let's read the words in what we call Rashi, the second line from the top. A person won't say, I'm going to do it Erev Yom Tov and I'll save some money, at least for Sheva Brachas, because the Dilma Misrami Milsa, maybe something will happen. You won't be able to do it Erev Yom Tov. And now that we paskin, you can get married anytime during the 7 days. So then a person is going to have to wait until the next week. Doesn't justify this. Allowing a person to get married Erev Haregel won't be an incentive for people to wait until Erev Yom Tov. They will get married earlier. There won't be a bittul of Piri V'Rivya. I just want to bring out the following challenge with all of that, just for people to be aware nowadays, halacha l'maisa, that when you have a wedding date set, if there is a change of date, and we really do everything we could for that never to happen, but if there is a change of date, there has to be another shivas nekim. Nowadays, there's something called dam chimut, and once the date changed, so nowadays halacha l'maisa, if there was a wedding to happen like today's Sunday, and something happened, and you're going to do it not today, you can't do it Monday. You have to have another 7. You have to wait a week anyway. But obviously, that was not the way they followed during the times of the Gemara, and that's why they were able to push it off a day or two. And the Gemara therefore says there won't be a bittul piri of yeriva because no one likes to rely on a plan B. If plan B is more than a week later, we'll stop here, God willing. Tomorrow, beautiful, important adaf with Samagadate, beginning with what's the source of Eima Arvin Simcha B'Simcha.